To get into the LGBT shelter, you need to be under the age of 25, and even then there's only 4 beds. So when the Colorado Springs shooting happened, I realized I can't keep waiting, for other people to solve these problems, because this is our community and it's just as much my responsibility as it is the next person. So because I have the know-how in real estate, I've lived in shared housing places, I went, through the system. I finally decided on creating a co-living environment house, what I call community-based housing. So I want to create an independent living type atmosphere in a multi-family house in a residential neighborhood. There's no sense in keeping our community apart, right? Like, we want to get back into the community. So I started this fundraiser, and I am trying to raise $169,000 to get us a property here in San Diego. And that is really, for me, there's a lot of bells and whistles and red tape that goes into building new development. And this is like a really quick route that we could house up to like 8 people. So much quicker than waiting for it to happen. So I'll drop the fundraiser link in the chat, but yeah, so, and then otherwise, I'm really excited for you guys to meet Naya, because Naya and I have worked together at different organizations, but just on mutual clients that we were able to, the smallest things make huge differences. And so, yeah, I will let Naya take it away. She, there's not a lot of people who don't know her in San Diego in the LGBT space. So yeah, go ahead, Naya.
Hey everyone, thank you so much, Levi. Thank you for the sweet, kind words. And thank you so much, Martin and Mustard Seed Project, for allowing me this opportunity and this platform. So my name is Naya Marie Velasco, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I serve as the Director of Programs at the Transgender Health and Wellness Center. We are a nonprofit. We are trans-found, trans-led and operated. Our CEO is trans. All of our director level, administrators, as well as like our front desk administrators and our clinicians, who are nephrologist and registered nurse, who specialize in permanent hair removal and also laser hair removal in preparation for folks' gender affirmation surgeries. And just gender affirmation care in general. Hold on one second. I think someone's watching and there's feedback. 𝗟𝗲𝗃𝗀𝗃, I know you're listening to this in the lobby. Can you turn it down? Sorry, I like hear myself. So anyways, yeah, so we are a nonprofit agency. We take over the southern region of California. So we started in Palm Springs. We then ventured out and expanded to Riverside, and now we're in San Diego. And our San Diego office has been here for about a little over a year. And so again, the things that we specialize is gender affirmation healthcare. We provide free behavioral health services. We really do prioritize, folks who are in need of gender affirmation treatment care. So if you need letters of necessity, or if your patients or if your clients or your constituents need letters for, in regards to getting their treatments or surgeries accepted by their health insurance, we can definitely help with that as well. We also prioritize youth and families. So we offer that individualized therapy and long-term care. So yeah, in addition to that, we also have, one of the issues we're having here in San Diego is really securing funding specifically for housing, whether that be, emergency food, emergency shelter, whether that be, just funding for, prevention and diversion. And so, as a trans advocate, as a trans woman, I can really pioneer and speak to the needs of, that I have experiencing homelessness and housing instability and housing insecurity, but also to a lot of our patients that come in and a lot of the needs that they need, and a lot of what they experience is harassment, discrimination, and, just overall violence and sometimes even murder. So, acts of violence against their lives. So I just, I'm glad to be here, and thank you again for this platform. And yeah, I think I will talk about the fundraiser. I will allow you, Martin, to send that fundraiser separately. It's for Transgender Day of Visibility. And I will let you, send that to the folks that registered separately.
Cool.
Absolutely. And so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight myself so I could join y'all. And so thank you for introducing yourselves and giving an intro. Naya, you talked a little bit about some of the things that people in the LGBTQ community, specifically trans people, face in terms of securing housing and harassment and discrimination. Do you think you can touch a little bit more about some of the major problems and barriers you think people in the LGBT community and specifically trans people face?
I think it's a lack of safety, a lack of inclusion, a lack of resources that are trans specific, right? Like, I love my LGBT community, I love being queer, but when it comes to gender identity, we're still very much being policed, right? In regards to the way we present, the way we sound. We get asked invasive questions. We constantly get, if your identity documentation doesn't look or match, your presentation, then it's kind of like, it's almost like, there's always this rhetoric of like, fear mongering, right? Like, we're these predatory people and all we're trying to do is live authentically and just be true to ourselves. And I often feel like if you're not, cis, if you're not heteronormative, then you're othered. And I feel like, trans people in particular, also non-binary folk, because I'm not a non-binary person, but, I know that the erasure of non-binary people, folks who don't identify with, any, my family, there's this huge, exclusion, this erasure of, if you're trans, we're still fighting for equity. We're still fighting for civil rights, for basic human rights. And so it's evident in regards to, the lack of funding that we have. It's evident in the safety. It's evident in, a lot of trans people today. One of our incredible housing navigators, 𝗟𝗲𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃, people, because we're a medical facility and because we're trans-led and, there's a lot of trans representation here, people let their guard down and they really entrust us, right? So, so also with that note, representation matters, right? So visibility also matters. But people do not feel safe in shelters. Trans people do not feel safe in shelters. Again, that harassment piece is huge. There's people that need to bind. There's people who need to, wear gender affirming, garments under their clothing just to feel comfortable and safe. And, there's people who need access to surgeries, who need a safe private place to recover, right? And so, because these surgeries are life-saving, and we know that a huge majority of our community is struggling with, suicidal ideation, self-harm, mutilation to their bodies, coexisting issues such as substance use disorder. So, my huge thing is always like, I want programs to be trans-specific. I want housing programs to be trans-specific, shelters to be trans-focused and specific. Yeah, but I would say, harassment, discrimination, and violence. It's just sad that, these people who, are just trying to get, housing ready, right? Getting all their appropriate documentation, getting all their letters of necessity, in order to enroll in a specific housing program. Like, these people are met with constant barriers, scrutiny, criticisms, harassments against their safety and their livelihood. So it's a huge issue. And I feel like transphobia, the way it's presented here in San Diego, it's like always presented in this like really beautiful presentation with like a bow, and we're fixing it, we're working on it, but that's not the case. A lot of our patients are struggling. They're in deep suffering, and a lot, because we are a border city, we do serve a lot of migrants, a lot of asylees and refugees, because we are a sanctuary city, and because we are, trans people are a protected class, under Title VII, and in regards to gender expression and identity, we're allegedly a protected class. So a lot of folks come here from, Texas, from, the South, from, Florida, from the Midwest and things like that, just to gain basic access to care and basic needs, So there's a lot that needs to be done and addressed.
Indeed.
Do you wanna touch on that?
Yeah. So definitely, it is. So there's a whole handful, I guess, that I'll just kind of list through. But LGBT people who are also experiencing homelessness are also more likely to experience sex trafficking, domestic violence, reoccurring trauma. So sometimes a trans woman may have been being sex trafficked and then sort of unknowingly ended up in another sex trafficking ring, and the cycle continues, because they're trying to have a safe place to stay. Assaults of every kind, whether it be sexual or physical, that was something that I witnessed when I was homeless, and it just happens constantly. We've gotten a lot of stuff in the news lately about people, harming homeless people, but that's just the stuff that makes the news. So LGBT people are also disproportionately charged with sex crimes. So I have never met a heterosexual person who was charged with indecent exposure for trying to use the restroom. But we know that we do not have public restroom facilities for anybody in San Diego. And I have met quite a few trans women who unfortunately had this now on their record for the rest of their life, thus making it even harder for them to access housing. And then the last one I would say would be going back in the closet, where if you think about, like, on any given day, you have like a roulette of those experiences that are going to happen to you. Any normal person, or not normal, but any person would say, maybe I just don't need to tell people I'm gay. Maybe they don't need to know I'm bisexual. Maybe I don't need to tell anybody I'm trans until after I get my housing or whatever, right? And that can also just be, so detrimental as well, just for them in their life. So
What I'm hearing is a lot of extreme trauma that a lot of trans people are facing. What are some ways that there are spaces that can be cultivated that could allow people who are transitioning out of homelessness but have experienced that kind of trauma to heal?
yeah. I mean, I'll take the lead just because I do have my idea. I really fully agree with everything being LGBT led, that like you have to have lived experience in it, right? But I also know that healing in a community is done so much better in a community, because healing is hard enough anyway. There's so much isolation that and loneliness that can come from recognizing traumas that you've gone through. But I also know that living in those kind of community environments where my peers had, we didn't all have to like each other, but we did have to get along to the extent that we knew that the other one was facing the same kind of discrimination that we were facing. And so I'll let Naya.
So I'm definitely hearing that it's about bringing people together and giving people that safe space and lived experience. And I think that's a good segue to you, Naya, because that seems to be exactly what the Trans Health and Wellness Center does.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have this incredible event that is hosted every week here in San Diego. It's called Trans and Non-Binary Tuesday, and it's a cultivated safe space, for people to come and to express themselves free of any harm and discrimination. You know what I mean? Like Levi said, not everyone gets along, and not everyone's going to kumbaya, but drop-in centers are really important. Reoccurring events, support groups are really important. Peer support is really important. Again, that visibility, that lived experience, that nuance is so important, and really just helps folks feel heard, understood, and essentially there's this there's not a lot of bias coming into it, because you have that that nuance of lived experience. But yeah, I think cultivated safe spaces, drop-in centers are really important. Folks who are, who specialize in trauma-informed care, like you said, it's a lot of historic and systemic oppressions that are happening. And I think what people, need to understand, or should understand, is that, every other month there's like 25 Senate bills that are trying to get passed, like to ban trans people from using from using bathrooms, from accessing gender affirming healthcare, to just it's a lot. It's a lot, and it wears at you. And therapy is so important. I think in these spaces, like, we also have to have people who, who are trauma informed, who can really, just really help people unpack.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. But yeah, it's kind of all I got.
Can we touch on homeless services as a system, and the degree to which transphobia exists within that system, and what kind of training? I know now you touched on trauma-informed care, but what kind of training, or what can be done to make these services and programs more inclusive?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of unlearning. I think when we had an incredible training institute at the San Diego LGBT Community Center, and their lead, their director of the training institute, it was, a lot of it was not what you learned, it was what you had to unlearn, because we've been conditioned and groomed, and we are saturated in this system that's dichotomous, and white, it's rooted in white supremacy, and so a lot of it is unlearning, unpacking, also knowing that, as a trans person, I also navigate the world with internalized transphobia, self-hatred, and maybe that also shows up in how I interact with my own community. So a lot of it is just, a lot of it is unlearning, unpacking, and being trauma-informed, being culturally aware and sensitive. And, there's incredible trainings that, that the Transgender Health and Wellness Center provides. And so if folks are interested, we can definitely come in, and we have an incredible LMFT and overseeing therapists that can help, folks, whether it be consulting, whether it be reviewing people's best practices, intake forms, whether it be, equity and inclusion. But yeah, I think that, training is really important. And also being involved in the community. I think, you can read something in a textbook, or but actually being because we live in such a cis saturated heteronormative world. So it's really important, if folks want to learn more, or, make friends and come into these spaces, learn, take it all in, because you'll have fun.
Yeah. And I want to add to that too, as far as, there are a lot of LGBT people who have that internalized homophobia. And I know I was put in a lot of therapy to make sure that, to assure that I came out heterosexual. But we definitely have not only our internalized homophobia, but within the LGBTQ plus community, the T is so often left out of the LGB. And so even when, so if I have clients who come to me who are LGB, then I may send them to like family health centers where I go. If they're trans, I 100% want to, or non-binary or IA, I want to connect them to Trans Health and Wellness Center, like, because they have the lived experience. I know that those clients are gonna feel so welcomed when they get there. But in that, there's the internalized homophobia, but within the LGBTQ community as a whole, what's interesting to me is how many LGBT people have faced homelessness and maybe got out of it. And at the same time, there is a lot of hatred from the LGBT community towards the homeless, specifically in Hillcrest. So we just really have to bring this community together. So
I think we just started this forum, but I think there is a lot of content that we've actually already talked about. And even from myself, like, I'm unpacking everything we're talking about. Like we started going really strong. And now you were touching on the education piece. I think that when it comes to these issues, especially trans issues, I would say, I know from the people in my life that typically there's a lack of education on this subject. And I think there's a lack of awareness. So I'm really just grateful that both of you are here and both of you are willing to be so vulnerable with your stories and your experiences. When you try to go to spaces to bring education and bring your stories, whether it could be in homeless services or just anywhere else, do you feel like you're getting a lot of pushback, or do you feel like people are rejecting your stories or rejecting what you're trying to speak upon? Anyone can go first.
Yeah, I definitely, yeah, no, I don't feel like I feel any pushback in the sense that I don't get a lot of people like saying anything directly to my face or even tweeting at me. But typically where I try to use my lived experience most is like with lived experience advisors, where we talk to city leaders and the county board of supervisors. And through that, being able to tell my story, and even sometimes as like, I'm telling it, I don't necessarily know that the impact that it's going to have or that I want it to have, but I just know that there are parts of my story that have to be told. And it's kind of take it or leave it, because I didn't live like a perfect life. And, there were things that I did that were, just not like, I got a lot of tickets when I was driving my car. That added up. I ended up living in my car. And then, yeah, it just, I'll let you guys go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that there are, plenty of folks who want to do better, who want to learn more, who want to, there are folks who, okay, so I will explain it this way. There are folks who are co-conspirators. When you reach out to them, when you ask them for something, whether they be, elected officials, their representatives, whether they be a part of an institution that kind of is like, this gatekeeper of something that, our community needs, like you can identify a co-conspirator, because I always say that they part the sea for your institution or for your patient or for your client. You will also get the people that, it's a mandatory training based on our equity statement, our equity and inclusion, like we have to, and our policies, like we have to undergo these trainings. But, I think, you get really excited, like when you're giving these presentations or doing these trainings, and like you can identify like who is like really on your side. But then, like, for instance, like an example, I don't know if folks are familiar with what's going on in Santee, but there was a Black transgender woman who was utilizing the locker room, just going to the gym. It's an aquatic, a YMCA known for their aquatic sports center. And so, she ends up getting like policed by this 17-year-old young woman, and there's like this fear-mongering campaign. So as much as you think that you're going ahead, then you start having these individuals go before, city council in Santee, declaring that, trans people, that, a man is in a woman's locker room, like, and then fear mongering. So it's like, as far as we think that we're moving ahead, it's always like these Senate bills, and it's always like these, these incidences in my home city that, like, you're like, okay, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, especially because, a lot of people are transphobic, and Levi made a really great point. There's like a trans exclusionary movement, especially like in the lesbian community, in the gay community, like, the T is always put last. We're always an afterthought. And, we're always, gosh, it's like, if you knew our history, you knew that we gave you queer liberation. Like
we have pride because of trans women. It's for anybody on this call who does not know that.
Exactly. So it's like, yes, the trainings are important. They're most important when they're revisited, because you can't just go through a 3 hour, 2 hours training. This information has to be revisited. And I can't mention how many times, I had given a presentation or even received a presentation again from that training institute. And it was like, oh, the third training, that's when it clicked. Or, that's when I started applying those principles, you know what I mean? So training is important, but also the amount of time that you're investing in those trainings and the amount of time that you're using to actually implement, because you can read all day, you can blah, 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 like you can take in information, but if you're not applying it to the practice, whether it be in your casework, whether it be, in your housing program, whether it be in like your social event, whatever, then it's not gonna do of any service.
Yeah.
I think we're touching a lot on the social awareness about queer issues and trans issues. I have a very specific question to touch more on this, but I just kind of want to emphasize something you said, Naya and Levi, that you affirmed about how trans women were really instrumental in leading the queer liberation movement. I don't know if anyone in the audience can relate to this, but for me, I grew up in a really religious background. I come to this space as a gay man, and when I was in the closet, I know for sure I was transphobic. I know for sure I had deep internalized homophobia. So whenever someone has those attitudes, I always think to myself that I used to have the exact same ones. I used to have those same biases. I used to have the same thoughts, but because I crossed the line of marginalization, I can empathize a little better. Do you feel like what's lacking in our society is empathy and just more visibility on these issues? Anyone can touch on it.
Yeah, we're just a divided nation on so many points, like on so many things right now. And it's like, as a world, as a whole, like we just need to come together as a community, because it's like, I was mentioning, that we all make the same promise and pledge to the American flag, which is for one nation, indivisible, right? And then at the end, liberty and justice for all. And like, I think if just like as a whole community, as a whole society, we could focus on the last part, like we'd be so much further ahead.
Yeah, I have to say, it's hard to have empathies, especially when you haven't experienced something, but you can definitely have sympathy for sure. And I just think, I think we're doing our best with what we got. And, I hope that within the next 5 years, we'll be like, 20 steps ahead versus just one. Especially, we're still fighting very hard for just respect. Honestly, that's literally all we want. We're not asking for the moon and the stars or any better extra treatments. Like, we're literally just asking for fairness and equality and respect. You know what I mean? Like everything
I'm
is always
for extra.
no, go ahead, Evan.
I said, I'm asking for extra. We didn't have, and you mentioned the non-binary thing earlier. We didn't have any non-binary beds in our shelter system at all until this year. And part of that came from advocating and being like, hey, if we're going to invite, you know, LGBT people from other states, we need to actually be able to have their back when they get here. So yeah, so I'm asking for extra. You can, you know, but yeah, equality, yes, but I'm going a step farther and pushing for more.
Understood. And just want to emphasize again, I'm very thankful that both of you are here and being very vulnerable with, you know, your lived experience and sharing with all of us. I kind of want to transition a little bit to housing instability, specifically right now with transitionally aged youth. Both of you are on the front lines of working with people who are LGBTQ+, but also who are facing housing instability. One of the big things that is an issue is that people have unsafe homes when it comes to matching with their identity, with whether it be trans or queer. And so a lot of young kids do end up homeless. Can you speak a little bit more to that, give us more insight, and then also speak upon what resources are available for young children who are fleeing unsafe houses because of their identity?
Yeah, definitely. So there was a state bill introduced in California this year that if there were other states introducing legislation that would criminalize parents if they sought any kind of gender affirming care, healthcare resources for their children. So the state of California and then the city of San Diego doubled down on it. Was that, you know, this state is a place that's safe for all LGBT people. And we just don't have what we need to be able to support that.
Yeah, I'll have to agree with that. You know, we have, you know, the Safe Stay program, 18 to 24. We have, you know, what is it? Urban Street Angels, which is a bridge shelter. You know, there aren't enough resources. And, you know, a lot of these children, a lot of these youth are socially displaced because, like you said, acts of violence, just, you know, whether it be physical, emotional, you know, financial abuse, all kind abuse looks different, right, for everybody. But, you know, we just know, like, yeah, a lot of these homes that they're in are unsafe, or, you know, housing instability also looks like couch surfing or staying with friends or staying with chosen family. And those situations aren't always the safest too. You know, there's a lot of homophobia and transphobia in a lot of households, whether they be macroaggressions or microaggressions, you know, and so, you know, that's why suicide is so high within the youth. But, you know, there aren't enough services. There's not enough housing programs or even, you know, shelters for the 𝗲 youth. So I would say we're good, but we're not great. And there's definitely, you know, there's definitely a gap in services when it comes to our 𝗲 youth.
Like, yeah, like I want us to be able to be that sanctuary city where this is a safe place for LGBTQ youth to come, and all LGBT people. I'll also say on that point, I had mentioned earlier, you know, I feel like one of the harms in being homeless and LGBT is that a lot of these people go back into the closet. And so I think that the data is very clear when it comes to LGBT youth, their orientations and gender identities. Whereas when they've gotten a bit older and they're still out in the streets and they've told, you know, as many VI stats or case managers that they were LGBT and then bad stuff kept happening to them, then a lot of times they just stop saying that because they feel like it's interfering with their housing, or it's interfering with whatever it may be. So yeah, definitely it's all ages, but when it comes to transition age youth, one of the other issues is because that is the data set that we have mostly is in the youth, that influences funding streams, right? And what comes down from the federal government and the state government. And so one of the issues that we have too in relation to youth is that most of the major cities in the United States that have large homeless problems also have large LGBT shelters. And some of them will have all ages, but typically, because most of the funding is coming through for youth, we can get facilities built for youth a lot easier. That being said, though, we still do not have the actual infrastructure in San Diego, but it's something that we need. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think me and Levi can count both on one hand how many programs and how many, infrastructures there are and housing programs there are for, our LGBT here in San Diego. Like Sunburst Youth Housing is like the only housing project. People are like crossing their fingers and their toes to like, get elected into that housing program, but a lot of people are not leaving because there's
Right.
they have it good. It's a really wonderful program. They stay for a while, which is wonderful. You want consistency. But when there's only 25 units available for for LGBTQ youth, that's a long way.
Compared to the 2,500 that are out there on the streets every given night in San Diego. Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah.
But yeah, like you said,
and I have not gotten anybody into Sunburst because I'm telling you, those youth hold on to their beds so good there. So
yeah. But we definitely need more. We have so much real estate here when it comes to, like I think about like that model of like the convention center and how like we have these buildings that can be cultivated into like, bridge shelters or, safe stays or, for our LGBTQ youth, for our LGBT adults and older, because also we have to consider our older, more mature adults because, Social Security, you can't live on $900 here in San Diego. So we also have to take into account and add into the conversation our older adults, a lot of our pillars in our community who are surviving on, Social Security or, a $900 disability check, which is disheartening because we definitely need to, take care of them. Literally, a lot of us are like one paycheck away from, being sequestered, being in the street, living in our car. Just the cost of living is really high. Yeah.
Yeah, to touch on that aspect of our older adults, we did have a forum before on aging into homelessness. And we touched on how it seems like we have a society where if you don't have a lot of security in your older age, you naturally will age into homelessness. And just what you were saying, Naya, when I was a caseworker, we would have clients where, they're 67 years old, they have chronic conditions, they can't work, and they'll say something like, well, here's I take $900 in Social Security, can you help me find housing? And that just doesn't exist.
yeah.
Segueing specifically to housing, Levi, can you touch more on your program to provide housing, and what does it really look like to have housing that is specific for people who are LGBT, specific for people who are trans, and to help them transition out of homelessness?
Yeah. So for my homes, I have used sort of my lived experience in some aspects, and totally if you have some tips or tricks you want to throw in the chat, I will read them later also. But there are like reoccurring themes that are specific to the LGBTQ community. One that you have heard repeatedly today was safety, right? And also, you've heard about some some divisiveness within the community itself. One of my big focuses is not only to make it a house that like works as far as, just housing people, but I want it to work for the tenants who live there. And that's what's like really important to me. So ideally, in some of these things may be, slow to start, but ideally, even in some of the rooms will be shared rooms, as well as like there may be private options. But even in the shared rooms, right? You can have a roommate that you get along with great and all that, but you may still want privacy changing. So it's not too much to throw up a room divider in that room, right? And then one of the other things that I want to do, because as someone who lived in shared housing, one of my biggest fears was always, oh, somebody's going to steal my stuff and somebody's going to touch my stuff. And 90% of the time, there's this big blow up and somebody can't find something in the house and then they find it, but then there's been this whole emotional turmoil now. So one of the ways that I would like to prevent that is where even in the cases where there is two people in a room, they have a key that only opens their door. I lived in a community kind of environment in New York that we really saw a lot of success with utilizing space saving designs. So that is something else that's huge to me. But ideally, I want them to have streaming services. I want them to build relationships in these houses that, are really hard to build anywhere else. And I know that in the shared housing situations that I've stayed in, so many of the people that I lived with, even I can think of times where we did not get along, but I still talk to all of those people today. And so, yeah, that's really the idea of what I want to provide and go for. So.
And I love the emphasis on privacy and emphasis on giving people dignity in that shared housing. How can people directly donate to that cause?
I've dropped the GoFundMe in the chat, and I will also send it to Martin to send out with his email. I will also drop in the chat my link in the bio here in a minute, and that has a link to my social media as well as my website, and there's a little bit more ideas there of what I have planned. So.
Awesome. I'm running to the tail end of my questions. So if anybody has any, put them in the chat. I see Amelia has a question here. Are there any specific trainings that could help improve the service delivery to our LGBTQ+ community? Naya, I know you touched on trauma-informed care. Is there anything specific that folks in the homeless services industry can get trained on?
Yeah, if you email, I will leave you all directly to our licensed marriage family therapist and our director of our behavioral health program. So it's literally VAN at trans.health, and let them know that you would like to, you or your agency or your organization or even your family would like to undergo an intensive training, an in-depth training about, LGBTQ inclusivity, concepts, identities, but also in-depth, cultural sensitivity trainings regarding, gender identity, gender expression. We have a various training catalog. So yeah, they can reach out to us and we'll be happy to help them.
And Katie put that in the chat there. So my last few questions I have for you, Naya and Levi. And again, I appreciate you being here and being vulnerable and open and sharing with us. How do you personally resist burnout and keep yourself going when you're working in a situation that is so personal to you and on a daily basis perhaps could be triggering to you because you are someone with lived experience?
So really, with my 5 years of social services background, I've experienced burnout 3 times. And we have this wonderful thing called PTSD where our brain is like, I'm not going to do that again. So I will say this, do not go on the roller coaster ride. You know, you have to be anchored. You know, they're there to they need your support, and you know, you're going to get activated. You're going to maybe relive something. You're probably going to be triggered. But you know, it's important to know your capacity, know what you're an expert in. And if you don't know something, or if someone else is an expert in something, then feel free to like do a warm handoff. I think it's, you know, like for instance, like, you know, Levi is an expert in their field, you know, like we all have experts on our team. And so I feel like when someone has like wraparound services, like when they're, you know, their housing needs are being met by their housing expert, their, you know, social services needs are met by the Health and Human Services Agency. Like, let people be the expert in their area of expertise and handle it. And you don't have to be the knower of everything, and you don't have to like solve their problems for them. Like, you can elicit new behaviors by motivational interviewing. And you know, I think also is like sometimes what initiated my first burnouts is like, you want it more than them. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I feel like don't get on the roller coaster ride, and you're going to want it more than them because you're going to want to save their life and help them. But that's not going to be a service to you. And then also, you know, you don't have to be an expert in everything. Don't be afraid to like give a warm handoff to someone who is an expert in that area. So that's just my little spiel.
So as a human, don't do it all.
Yeah, definitely. I love the warm handoff tip for sure. And this has definitely been one of those weeks for me where I know I'm pushing my limits. Tomorrow is like kind of the last big day I gotta get through, but I'm confident. I have had to really just like learn how to articulate for myself when it's going to be one of those kind of weeks, because I'm aware of like what my limitations are and when I'm doing too much, right? But I also know the capacity and bandwidth at which I could do those things. But there's often, because of homeless services working the way that it works, it's a very hurry up and wait environment. So I have like currently 2 clients who got their housing matches and signed their leases in July, but they still have not moved in to their housing units. And then tomorrow morning is the point in time count. And then it's also a press conference for NAMI's new shelter opening. And so, of course, this was the week that they decided to change everything around on me and try to get them into housing. So as of right now, I was able to get one of them into housing. The other one is supposed to go in on Tuesday. But I am totally already thinking now about like hiking Cowles Mountain and taking a day off and getting some rest at the as soon as my last one is in there. So yeah, it's the, and NAMI so teaches the self-care piece. So I'm glad that I also have that like reminder constantly. It's like on other emails. So yeah, and then with lived experience advisors, like we started a group chat recently, and so some of us are service providers, some of us have lived experience, well, all of us have lived experience, but and it's that's my group that I can really like tell them like how bad it really was that day, you know, and so they've just done an incredible job at elevating me and making sure my head stays on my shoulders. So
congratulations to you and your client. It sounds like this has been a crazy, what time is that point in time count tomorrow? Is that at 4 a.m.?
Yeah, so I gotta be up at 3:30. I'm going to bed right after this. I promise.
So thank you for being with us. My last question to close us out. And again, thank you for both of you for being here. It's a privilege for me to be part of this discussion. And yeah, this discussion, and just thank you for the work you do in our community as a whole. For the people, I'm looking at the audience here, and there's some people who work in homeless services who are part of that community, but there's a good amount of people that aren't. And for the people in the group here, what are some ways that they can get more involved in supporting people who are facing homelessness, supporting causes such as LGBTQ+ causes? What are some last things that people can be taken away from this discussion to just be more active and be more involved?
Volunteer. We have an incredible volunteer program. So again, if you want to learn more about the trans community, if you want to help support, with our mission and, help us, maybe you have a skill set that you want to help us with in exchange, for your support, that would be wonderful. Our objective is, we would never want to send people into a space like where they're being re-traumatized. And so, if people want to come and people want to volunteer at the Transgender Health and Wellness Center, you just go to www.trans.health and you go ahead and fill out the volunteer application. You'll then get assigned to our office. I'll do an onboarding interview with you, and you can, come to outreach events. You can come to fundraisers. You can come to mixers. You know what I mean? Again, if you want to learn about the community, you have to immerse yourself with the community. So I would definitely suggest people volunteer for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And then I will say kind of more so along the lines of pay attention to your internal rhetoric. And like Martin, I also was raised with both homophobic and transphobic narratives. And so pay attention to kind of your own thought processes, right? Like if it's a Black trans woman experiencing homelessness, she may just need help. She may not need you to try to figure out in your mind what it was that caused that to happen, because the cause of it isn't going to help her out of it. So really, there's definitely in the Hillcrest community specifically, if you have neighbors, talking about anti-homeless or anti-LGBT, it's still our community. Like San Diego, it's ours, it's all of ours. And so, yeah, it's our responsibility.
So we are at time. I want to thank both of you for your time and just sharing with us this information. We're going to send out the links to both your organizations and your causes out into our newsletter and to our thank you follow-up email. The last thing I just want to say is that there was a lot of content we talked about. There's a lot of terminology we used. If it was something that you've heard for the first time or something that you're unpacking right now, I encourage you to keep learning. I think there's a lot I learned in this discussion. There's a lot I'm always learning. And we need to all keep learning in order to make action happen. So I just want to say again, thank you to our speakers and thank you for everyone for giving your Wednesday night to this discussion, highlighting this. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Wednesday night.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
Get some good sleep, Levi.
I will.